Martin, good evening, good afternoon.
Good evening, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing very well, my friend. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having a conversation with me this afternoon. It's been a pleasure getting to know you up until this point, and today we look forward to having a chat about the Academies Enterprise Trust. So I thought a good way for us to kick off would be, could you give an overview about what the Academies Enterprise Trust is and does?
Yeah, certainly. So we are a multi-academy trust, and that's essentially a group of schools. There's 57 of us, 57 schools in total, of different types. So special schools, primary schools, and secondary schools. And we're spread out all over the country, all the way from sort of Middlesbrough and Hull up in the north, all the way down to the Isle of Wight, Torquay in the south. As they may or may not imply, we deliver education to students of all ages. So so a multi-academy trust is essentially, like I said, a group of schools. We are state funded entirely, so all of our funding comes from the normal mechanisms that schools are funded by. So we don't make a profit either, and we're a complete non-for-profit organisation, and effectively we manage those schools. In the old systems, all the schools have been managed by local authorities, or in some cases faith schools, but mostly local authorities. What a multi-academy trust does effectively is, rather than the local authority running those schools, it's a group of schools that get together, usually with a common aim or a particular set of aims in mind, and they manage the effective running and improvement of those schools.
So what I'm hearing, and I didn't really know this, right? And it's interesting that you say it, because when I was still at school, X amount of years ago, I remember the fiasco on the news of, all schools are going to be made academies, and I didn't really understand what it meant. But it sounds like, from the description you just said, is that an academies trust is basically like a management umbrella, where you manage the schools and delivery of education rather than a local government entity doing it. Is that right?
That's essentially right, yeah. So the funding sources are exactly the same. And actually many of the procedures, policies, if you like, and rules that we abide by are exactly the same. But we do just have a bit more autonomy in certain areas, in particular about how we spend our money within those bounds. We've got a little bit more autonomy on how we structure things as well. And it also allows for schools to group together that perhaps aren't physically located near each other, but like I said, have a common goal, or perhaps support schools outside of their immediate area that where they can see partnerships that would form quite naturally. We're able to do that as a trust. So yeah, but in many ways, it's not a massive departure. I think there was certainly a certain amount of scaremongering around academies and what that means. But they're still state funded. They're still bound by most of the same rules. They're still inspected by Ofsted, for example. So the DfE are still obviously very carefully monitoring what they do, and fund them appropriately.
So I think you did mention this a moment ago, but it passed my ear. And in its current size, how many schools fall within your management, or what does that equate to in staff and students?
Yeah, so it's 57 schools in total, but they vary greatly in size. We've got schools with as few as sort of 40, 50 students, either very specialist schools or ones that are in very rural areas, some small primary schools, and then all the way up to 1,800, 1,900 in size. But altogether, it adds up to somewhere in the region of 32,000 students,
Wow.
and about 5,000 staff, depending on how you count the staff. So it's quite a big entity if you think about it like that. It's 37,000 users. So in terms of scale, it's pretty big.
So we will come on to the point of infrastructure in those schools in a moment, and supplying IT and making sure everything runs. But what's kind of going on at the Academies Enterprise Trust right now? What are the the big technological initiatives or big drivers which are happening?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I mean, ed tech is always moving, and it feels like, unfortunately, the funding is never quite keeping pace with the ambitions that we've got. But we are seeing students are more mobile than ever before in terms of their needs. They expect to be able to access applications and data and things very quickly on their own phones or devices that we provide for them. So, there's more and more drive to mobility. The old computer suites of the past are slowly being phased out in a lot of cases. And instead, we're rolling out huge numbers of devices. So we've since the first COVID lockdown, we've rolled out around 30,000 devices, almost one per student, and that is actually increasingly becoming the norm for schools to provide that level of sort of IT resourcing. And of course, there's all sorts of other challenges going on that come with that. So how do you then safeguard those students with those devices? How do you ensure they're cared for and that they're getting the most out of them is a huge focus for us at the moment. It's not about just putting equipment in people's hands, but how are we then getting value out of it? We're fully funded by the taxpayer, so we have to make sure we get value out of everything we do. It's not just about throwing out tech because it looks good. And then there's always advancements with new web-based applications and how we assess those for suitability and manage them. Obviously, again, it's different from a few years ago where so much of that would have been deployed from maybe a central server and we could vet it all and license it all. Actually, students can go and access a wealth of different tools there, and we have to manage to curate that and make sure that that's fit for purpose. And of course, there's things like I said, the drive to the cloud, putting more and more of our data into the cloud, but making sure we're doing that in a way that makes sense. More of our services going to the cloud as well. So our HR system, our payroll system, our MIS, management information system, are all now in the cloud. But we keep pushing and pushing and pushing to find ways that make sense for us to do that with other applications as well.
So, if you were to speak to a private sector organization or like a corporate, what they would probably be saying is, in terms of major trends, is, well, all of our employees are now mobile, they're working from home, and so we have to provide them devices and security to do so. We're moving our applications to the cloud. And it sounds like that's exactly what's happening at the Academies Enterprise Trust. It's just you're doing so with students and staff members, instead of it being, employees and, people that work for a private sector organization. So I'm guessing some of the reasons that they would do that are the same, but mobility in the sense of Academies Enterprise Trust and of students, what does that mean? What does that define? Does that mean that students are working one day a week from home? I'm guessing it doesn't, but how does that actually manifest?
No, that's, again, a really good question. So no, typically students aren't working from home, but, in any sort of scheduled way, but we have to prepare ourselves for the fact that there have been lockdowns and there may be lockdowns in the future. But also, actually, you'll know that learning doesn't finish the moment they leave the classroom, or it shouldn't do anyway. Instead, you have your homework, you have your private studies, especially as you move on throughout the school. And one of the things that lockdown really highlighted for us is this digital divide. So, for example, when it first became apparent that the students were going to need to do some work from home, we rather naively sent out a survey to all of the parents saying, have you got a device your student can use at home? And we were quite happy to see that sort of 80-90% said, yeah, of course they do. What we didn't realise is for a lot of families, that means maybe one mobile phone or an iPad between 4 or 5. And so then when we're trying to give them work and trying to push them to achieve on these devices, it wasn't happening. So we had to quite quickly get a lot smarter about how we asked those questions. And it actually turned out that very few of our students had a dedicated device. And of course, those that did were a huge advantage. And that hasn't stopped now COVID's over, because actually teachers are setting more and more classwork that's expected to be done online. And of course, we want them to utilise the great power of the internet and the amazing resources that are at the fingertips. Right. You can now do things with Photoshop online on a device. And we want all of our students to have access to that, not just the lucky few. And so when we talk about mobility, it's about that. It's about making sure that every student, no matter what their background, has access to the same tools and the same advantages. And so we know that if we set a piece of work that says design this beautiful poster in InDesign, It's not that these students from a less well-off background are going to only be able to do that in the 1 hour lesson, and the more advantaged ones can go home and use their MacBook Pro. Actually, we know we've given them the tools to all work on that outside the classroom, inside the classroom, flexibly, and to be able to achieve that way. So that's what it really means. It's almost a great equalizer of opportunity, and it's and the tech is really there to do it in a way that it wasn't 5 or 6 years ago.
So that's a really interesting point, and I agree that as you said about the great equalizer, that was what was going through in my mind. It's just quite simply one device for a student, which in the grand scheme of 30,000 students, one device is not that massive, but for a single student who may be sharing that device with 4 or 5 other family members, the opportunities that opens up in terms of what they can do at school, is quite massive. So it sounds like, that rollout of devices has been quite a major thing since COVID. And I'm guessing that there was maybe a few challenges pre-rollout and post-rollout, i.e. pre-rollout, how are we going to fund this stuff? How are we going to get it distributed to everyone, etc. Post-rollout, I'm guessing things like, okay, how are we making sure that everyone is secure on those devices? Could you maybe give us, a walkthrough of the challenges and, things that have to be considered when you're doing a project of that ilk?
Yeah, so absolutely security and e-safety, or safeguarding as we often refer to, is absolutely top of that agenda. So while we absolutely acknowledge that giving them access to a Chromebook or an iPad is a great tool, it also comes with a whole set of challenges. So how are we ensuring that they're accessing content that's appropriate? How are we sure that the parents are okay with them having these devices and are able to manage them and say, actually, I don't want my student on a device after 9 o'clock. How can we put the controls in place to do that? So one of the things, of course, we've had to look very carefully at is a choice of MDM, mobile device management suite, and make sure that we can turn off, on and off a lot of these features as the schools or even the individual parents require. So we've had to put a lot of work into making that fit for purpose in an education environment. Thankfully, the MDM market has actually been present in education for quite some time, so the feature set was actually already quite rich, but it takes a lot of planning to get this right. So that's definitely part of it. But then there's an even deeper side to that, which is, as well as the things that you would simply want them to stop them from getting onto, so pornography and violent websites, sometimes actually this is an opportunity for us to step in, if you like, where there's maybe something a little bit less obvious. So for example, if a student is spending a lot of time looking at dieting websites and things like that, we want to stop that as such. There's nothing wrong with a dieting website. But if the same student is doing it again and again and again, some of the tools we've got allow us to see those patterns. And rather than simply pop up a block page saying you can't do that anymore, it informs the school's designated safeguarding lead that there might be something going on there that they may need to take a look at, because that student could be having low self-esteem or body image problems and things like that. So it's given us a sort of opportunity there, but again, it increases the challenge for us to make sure we get that right, that we get that balance right, that we're not being flooded with false positives, or that we're not missing opportunities to intervene. So you'll have seen in the news stories about that young girl who was on Instagram and was consistently seeing negative things, and unfortunately led to her taking her own life. That's exactly the sort of thing that the responsibility that rolling out devices on this scale to students brings, that we can't turn our back on.
Yeah, and I didn't think of that as we were setting up that question. And so the piece about student welfare and like a proactive welfare management, it's fantastic that you can, you're mobile and you can access everything from home, but the actual things which are going on behind the scenes and you can read in between the lines, that's like an added benefit of this rollout. So, that's a really interesting piece, which I hadn't thought of. But yeah, that's great to hear about, like, the projects that are going on and some of the technology that underpins the organization. I wanted to talk about the process of Academies Enterprise Trust, because you have all of these organizations or schools underneath you. In terms of when you're procuring technology, does that happen at the group level all the time, or do schools have the bandwidth and the ability to procure stuff on a local level as well?
So it's a mixture, which I think is quite healthy. So there are some things that we completely standardise on, either as a matter of statutory compliance or because of the huge advantage of book procurement or support. So, for example, antivirus. We standardise completely on an antivirus product across our schools. It makes sense too, because as an IT department, we're the subject matter experts. We can select the best tool. We know it, we understand it, we can support it. And of course, we get great advantages from purchasing 30-something thousand licenses rather than 500 at a time.
Of course.
So that's really good, as well as the complexities of managing a contract, of managing all those contracts.
Yeah.
So something like that is essentially non-negotiable. That is the tool we've selected. There are some things that we sort of recommend and suggest, because it comes with some advantages to doing things in a standardized way. So, for example, makes and models of laptop. Again, we can drive efficiencies by having a few carefully selected makes and models. We can get better procurement deals by buying 500 of one type, all that kind of thing. But actually, there are some times where a particular school may be running a course that really requires a high-end laptop, or possibly bursary students sometimes are given a little bit of extra funding, but it won't stretch to a full spec laptop, so we can get them something a little bit cheaper. So we allow some conversation around those pieces, because there is sometimes it makes sense to break the mold. And then there are a few other bits as well where the school very much depends on the type and nature of the school. So some of them, for example, have invested in things like immersive suites, which essentially is a room you walk into with beautiful projections and scenes that immerse you in it, a bit like VR. There's some that are trialing things like VR. We don't standardize on those because we want to encourage the creativity, and hopefully when these things take hold and they're really showing their value, then they can become the standard. But we don't want to stifle that at school level and say, no, we will always tell you what's best, because actually a lot of our best ideas come from just a few people trying out first of all. A great example of that is some of the extensions and apps that we roll out for things like dyslexia. Started with just one teacher trying it out, and then has now become a trust standard to use. So in short, it's a real mixture, and we're always trying to find that right balance between telling people or discussing with people what needs to what decisions they need to make, and we don't always get it right, but but we do try to keep a healthy mix.
Yeah, sounds like those core services, and then where it makes sense, we'll do stuff at group level, and everything else, there's some leeway there. But yeah, we'll come back to that procurement piece in a moment. But I wanted to learn about your role as head of IT as well a bit more. So obviously there's heads of ITs throughout the world, throughout the country, and we don't necessarily want to hear about the job description that you signed up to, but what do you see your role as when you are the head of IT? What does that entail? What are you working towards?
It's massively varied is the short answer to that. The way the department and the trust is structured is I am sort of the de facto technical leader. So I'm the escalation point to some extent for everything. Now we've got a team of about 75 across the whole thing. So managing those people is of course a huge part of the job as well. And driving, I would say, if I could put it in a nutshell, it's driving my standards down that line and make sure that those standards are then felt and received well in the schools, and making sure that we're aligning carefully. So yes, my role definitely involves a certain amount of strategy. It involves a lot of procurement work, but it also involves a lot of just driving people to make the right decisions, to make intelligent decisions, to be engaging at the right level, and then dealing with technical things as well. There are certain technical issues that will be escalated to me, or at least I'll be involved with. So it's really varied, from some relatively sort of standard IT almost support type things, although not very often, all the way to big multi-million-pound projects. It's and it's one of the things I love about this role is I don't feel actually I'm pigeonholed completely as a typical manager. I'm very much still hands-on, but on the other hand, I do get some of the perks of being able to make big decisions as well. So it's
Sure.
It's very, very, very varied, which isn't for everyone.
And you alluded to it there, but do you still are you still getting your hands dirty on a day-to-day basis, configuring laptops and setting up devices and coding and programming and getting servers up and running and stuff like that, or is that not so much in your day to day now?
Yeah, I'd say it's rare, but I'm prepared to do it, and I think that's important. And there are times when I do get involved, when a school particularly needs that extra bit of support, and I can be available to help them with maybe a large device rollout and things like that. So it's not a huge amount of that, but I still think that is a small but important part. I think again in my role, it's really important to be quite relevant to the schools and to the staff that I'm trying to lead as well. So keeping up to date with the challenges they're facing and understanding actually what is a server rollout looking like these days, and getting involved in some of the detail to that is really helpful to me in doing my role. And again, it's one of the challenges. I can't spend all my time there messing around with servers and laptops, sure. And I have to be able to do the management as well. So it's like I said, it's there's elements of all of that.
And you just mentioned it there, the challenge of being, pulled in loads of different directions, and, not being able to support on all different kinds of projects. But if you were to, be asked, and if I were to press you on a couple of those challenges, which you think, God, like I really just wish that was not part of the job, or I really just wish that was not something I had to deal with, or that was something that I do really wish I had, what would those things be?
Oh wow, that's a good question. Which part of my role would I get rid of? I wouldn't quite say I'd get rid of it, but I've already alluded to this. One of the things that really drives me is that I think I have a passion for what I do, and I have a real sense of duty and care. I believe in the work I do, and I think what I would love to be able to do more effectively would be able to absolutely instill the values that I have in all of my team. Now, not to say they don't have values or the right values, but rather just to make sure it's absolutely consistent throughout the whole piece, that we're always all clear exactly what we're trying to achieve, why we're trying to achieve it, and why we put ourselves through the mill so frequently, and put ourselves at the coal face and work so hard. Because that is, I think, I would say time again, I would take an IT technician with a real strong sense of values and work ethic over one without that, but a great technical skill set every day of the week. And especially in education, where being personable, being driven, being kind-hearted is just so important. That is the one piece of my job that I'd say that if you could say you could make any part of your job a 10 out of 10, it would be that every day of the week.
So it's interesting, and it's kind of a recurring theme that maybe I was naive to, right? And maybe a bit arrogant to think, but initially, I think when a lot of people think about IT personnel or IT teams, they instantly just think technology, and they don't think about that there's other things which go into, actually, this is a team, this is a department that includes people. And so it's really interesting to hear that one of the challenges you spoke about was not even remotely related to technology, but it's actually related to values and the culture of the team. So it's an interesting dynamic to hear that, about a challenge that is part of your role. But we did touch upon the procurement part of your role earlier as well. And of course, as leading the department, you are mandated and you have that responsibility to bring the technology into the business, right? And make sure that the correct technology and the most pertinent technologies on the market are being brought into the trust. Vendors and organizations have the same mandate, but in flip, they have the mandate to try and make sure that you're aware of all of those technologies and those products. And I think sometimes there's a bit of headbutting that goes on in that relationship. So your experience of working with vendors and sales and marketing people, and bringing technology onto the business, would you say that's a positive experience, or one that could be improved?
Oh, I mean, first of all, I would say meeting with vendors and talking to vendors is almost universally a positive experience when I can make time for it. At the end of the day, they're people too, and they're usually passionate or interested in the product they're trying to sell. And so it's great to hear from vendors, and And I frequently will try to engage with vendors on LinkedIn, even if it's a product I don't think is going to be useful to me now. I want to hear about it because it could be useful in the future, or even if it's just so I can go, no, definitely not right for us. I'm glad I had that conversation because I know now that's not right for us, and it solidifies my thinking on something. That being said, the big but. There are a lot of vendors out there, and it's very difficult to engage with them all. And unfortunately, there is it's very difficult to see the wood from the trees. So my LinkedIn inbox is constantly hit with vendors with, if I'm going to be honest, relatively generic messaging about how they are the solution provider for you. And unfortunately, that makes it just very difficult to have quality conversations, because I don't really have the time to reply to them all and actually ask them, to almost cut to the chase, what makes you different? So going back to the question, what's my experience with them, is positive when I can get them engaged and I can have quality conversations. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to know which ones are worth having those quality conversations with, and being able to almost make time for them all.
And do you have, would you have the ability to quantify, how many LinkedIn messages, emails, phone calls that you're maybe getting in a week?
I mean, hundreds is all I can say. Hundreds and hundreds. I mean, I'm a bit of a LinkedIn glutton. I've got sort of 4,000 people on my LinkedIn, so I'm probably inviting it on myself. But that's because, like I said, I do value people's opinions and I want to see it. But yeah, and it's a lot, and there are some sectors that are particularly ripe for that. And not to denigrate anyone, but cybersecurity is a big thing. In reality. But it's also being absolutely massively pumped up on LinkedIn and places like that, and in my inbox, with everyone claiming they can do a job for us in terms of cybersecurity. And there are others as well. I think of waste disposal, waste electric. Absolutely tons of them. And of course, it's very difficult to differentiate. One is very much like another, and so those are the ones that I struggle with the most, because it's very difficult to engage with. But it's certainly dozens and dozens of LinkedIn messages, and I don't know how many calls a week, quite easily.
And can you think of anything specifically where you mentioned it's hard to see the wood through the trees? Is there any specific medium or piece of information or a type of content which always sticks out to you, and you think, because that person has sent me that, that is the reason that I'm going to take that call, or that's the reason I'm not going to take that call? They've done that bloody generic thing again, which I hate. Is there any things that you particularly admire or don't?
I would say that anytime they can lead off with a credible reference from another education institute is helpful, because it's, A, I can check it out, and B, it shows me that they understand the challenges of education and are more likely to be able to tailor their offering to it, and presumably someone else thought that it was a good idea to use their product. So that's great. They're basically telling me we're credible without having to say we're credible, which is really useful to me. I would say. I would say, any time a supplier can do anything like run a seminar or a training event or something like that, where you get the opportunity to, you're going to get something back by going to it, even if you don't really like their product. And some companies are really good at doing that. And, it really does. It's the long game for them, I'm sure, but it means they can really build up good relationships. We've got a number of suppliers who are on our list because they built up that long relationship over time. They haven't just gone straight in with a, do you want to buy 20 photocopiers of this sort of pitch, which is never likely to resonate particularly well. So yeah, those are the two things that spring to mind. I would say credible references from other people in the sector, and the ability to be able to almost, softly bring people on board and say, well, come along to this. Well, yes, we'll talk about our product. Of course, we're going to talk about our product, but also here's an opportunity for you to learn a bit and spend some time with us and build up yourself as well at the same time.
To actually provide some value, rather than just immediately asking to pitch a product or asking for a conversation, right? Things like that.
Yeah. And I guess, there's one other thing as well, which is, and it's not always easy, but try to focus in on what you do differently from other people, because actually sometimes I have to go back and say, well, that looks interesting, but what is it that you do differently from everyone else that's messaged me about laptops this week? If you can articulate that in your opening message, I would say you stand a far, far better chance of standing out from the crowd. And it's not always easy, but that's something for them to think about, I would suggest.
For sure. And then just one more point on this, Martin. So I think you did mention that, it's a constant pursuit of keeping update with technology and verifying and qualifying that it's something could be right or that it's not. Are you having conversations with vendors when you're outside of like a buying cycle, so to speak, or are you only going to engage with a vendor when you see that email come through or that LinkedIn message come through and there is actually like a kind of relevant project that you're working on?
Education doesn't move that quickly, unfortunately. So actually, we've got to spend more time engaging with suppliers outside of purchasing, because by the time we've got around to the point of putting out a tender or whatever, we've probably been thinking about it for some time, because we don't often get some influxes of funds and things like that. It's all planned for, and of course at our scale, we don't just tend to shoot off left, right, and centre purchasing stuff. So now I would definitely say that outside of the purchasing cycle is the better time to engage, if anything. We also, often by the time we've got to the sort of going out tender, we've got a pretty good idea ahead of the kind of thing we want. And actually there's not really much point engaging with a complete left field opportunity, because it's probably not going to be suitable.
You're already abreast of the market and you've done all of that pre-work in the months and years before, right?
Yeah, and education has got quite a strong community around it. So there are various forums, websites, associations, email groups and whatnot that deals with education technology. So most things that are of note are being discussed in those all the time. So we sort of got an idea. There's not many education products I would be completely unfamiliar with that I haven't seen discussed already. So it's quite a collaborative community, probably quite different from something like manufacturing, I would guess. Probably doesn't have that sort of sense of collegiate approach that schools do. I know many colleagues in other schools, other trusts that I would happily pick up the phone to and chat to. I'm not sure that a tractor manufacturer in Stoke is going to know a digger manufacturer in Torquay very well. I may be wrong, but they're probably not. The IT managers probably aren't on WhatsApp talking to each other, would be my guess.
No, of course. Well, Martin, that has been extremely interesting and useful. So, I do thank you for coming and having a conversation with me. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to, if there's any live roles or, technologies or any capabilities that you're looking for, and that you wanted to pitch them now, or, how can people get in contact with you? How can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and like I said, I'm quite a heavy LinkedIn user. So definitely that way is best to reach me through there. In terms of opportunities, I mean, I think, like I said a few times, we're always on the lookout for people who are really compassionate and care about technology and have got a real drive to make a difference with it. Always happy to hear from people who share those same sort of views, even if it's just for a bit of a chat over it. We're often recruiting to those sort of people, and if anyone who ever wants to talk about it, or equally if you're from a similar sector and want to have a chat about some of the things we've done, then I'm more than happy to do it. We don't always get everything right, absolutely far from it, but all the more reason to have a conversation, I'd say, about it.
Most certainly. Well, Martin, as I said, amazing to meet you. Thank you very much for coming and having a conversation with me. And I've got my fingers crossed that your LinkedIn gets ever more pounded from the being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Martin.